Have an RTR, but your wheels are just too small? Have an Alpha Pro, but want to live that sumo lifestyle? Well, your troubles are over. Just swap the wheels.
Will that work?
I don't know. That's for you to figure out. Time for the old swaparoo. The Alpha Pro and the RTR here have a lot in common. They are market comparables after all, but now it's time to see exactly how comparable they are by trying on each other's shoes. See, as soon as I saw that the Alpha Pro here had a big wheel kit stock, that being 17 inches in the front and 14 inches in the rear, I knew that meant that I could also try to see if I really got a bonus big wheel kit for the RTR. Because having a second set of dedicated wheels and tires for a whole other type of riding opens this kind of bike up to literally anything I can think of. That's why I was drawn to supermotos in the first place, because a supermoto with a set of dirt tires and wheels on the side is ultimately the Swiss Army knife of bike setups. Especially if I can get away with just borrowing a big wheel kit from another bike entirely, and that way I can completely avoid the extra 350 bucks that I would have to spend on a whole other set. Let's get right into it, although there's a problem right away because I have two bikes here that need to get up in the air so that we can take the tires off, but I only have one motorcycle stand. Well, that's easy enough. Home renovations for the win. I already have so many of these Home Depot buckets laying around, and the RTR here has already gotten a few parts from Home Depot Racing Development, so even better. Well, I think we're gonna start with the rear wheel, even though these are a little bit more complicated because they have not only a brake side, but a drive side, but the RTR's has a stock rear wheel, so I think it's gonna play nicer and, fingers crossed, line up easier. Well, with the two wheels off comes our first test and our first set of swaps. These have differing chain sizes. The Alpha Pro here has a much bigger, much thicker 420 chain compared to the RTR's smaller 35. So the first swap is going to be swapping these sprockets across so that way the sprockets stay with their intended bike. Here's an interesting fact. For the bolts on the sprocket of the Alpha Pro's wheel, there was no Loctite on these bolts. So FYI, put some Loctite on your sprocket bolts. And for the moment we've all been waiting for, the old swaparoo. Lines up. Lines up. Perfect. All right, let's get to fitting. We'll start with the Supermoto wheel on the Alpha Pro. Stay. 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 Ah, there we go. Whew. Halfway there. Why are you not moving? Looks like we need to swap a little bit more because this brake rotor is not the same size. I'm trying to get this thing lined up and then spinning it. It won't move. This is fixed basically to the rotor now because this is just, looks like a little bit too large to fit into this brake caliper. So rather than spacing this whole thing out, it's easier to just take this wheel off again, swap out the rotors, so that way it's both rotor and sprocket, and try it all over again. There we go. Now that the brake rotors are also swapped, this should bolt right up because I think it's gonna fit perfectly. And the funny thing was, when I was taking this off, the bolts were the opposite of what I had on the sprocket bolts. It was the Alpha Pro that was gobbed with Loctite, and the RTRs had like none at all. There we go, much easier. Think it works. All right, bike number 2. Issue number 2 now. You know, it wasn't until now that I realized why when you buy this from Electro & Co, the big wheel kit, that it comes with a different chain. I figured that maybe there's a different sprocket size with that one so it can keep gearing with the bigger wheel, but no, it's actually just so this thing actually fits. Because this rear wheel is so big, bigger than the stock one or even the Supermoto for that matter, it has to sit as far back in the adjustments on the swing arm as possible, and because of that, there's a few links that are missing. Not a huge deal in this case. I still have the old stock chain, so temporarily I'm gonna add a few links to that and have 2 master links on this, although I don't recommend you actually do that. Get a chain that actually fits. Talk about adjustment. Look at that. This is where it was. That's where it's gotta be. Good thing the bolts are long enough. There we go. Now that's a wheel setup. If I were to leave it like this, which do you think would perform better? This or this? I think I would put my money on whatever the rear tire was doing. So in this case, RTR for the dirt, Alpha Pro for the street. But you know what? Screw it. Let's actually find out.
Well, so far it's like I predicted. The RTR with the rear having the dirt, it sucks. Yeah, the rear just feels so lumpy with all the power going to a knobby. And then the front is like so small compared to the rear that I feel like it's kind of stink bugging. Whoa. This feels so weird. Corners really suck on this thing because the front is just so massive and thin. It just wants to dive. Oh, it feels so uncomfortable. Let's put some proper front wheels on these bikes.
And this is where things might get a little bit tricky, because if you've seen my RTR series, then you know that this front rim is not actually an RTR rim. This is the rear rim of a Mototech, and for whatever reason, the Mototech hubs share a different bolt pattern than just about any other bike, which is really annoying. I had to make a custom brake rotor for this in order for it to even fit. I'm hoping the front fork spacing and the brake spacing, most importantly, between these two is the same. Otherwise, I might have to make some more custom wheel spacers. Well, just like the rears, it looks like we are going to have to swap the brake rotors right off the bat. Just taking this thing off and comparing it to the two, I can see that this one is clearly larger, but the issue that I mentioned is that what the RTR has is the Mototech rear hub, which has a different bolt pattern. But no worries, I have the stock one still laying around from the original front tire. So we'll just put that one on the Alpha Pro. I'm also using the stock RTR spacers in this case because hopefully this is spaced the same as the Alpha Pro. Should work now that I have the proper hub and the proper brake rotor on it. Well, a little bit more adjustment. I had these adjusted out as far as they could, again to help with the spacing on the Supermoto wheels, so just loosen those up. We'll adjust that after the fact. Well, before I even finish up the Alpha Pro's front here, I think it's safe to say that whatever kit between these two bikes, whether it's a Supermoto kit, a big wheel kit, or anything in between, it is easily transferable. Everything bolts right up. My particular issue now lies with this custom front, which didn't come with any of these kits, so I have to make this thing fit, particularly with the brake rotor. Because like we saw with the 17-inch rim, this rotor that came on it is much, much bigger than this one. So I don't really think that this one is gonna sit in the brake pads with this very much, if anything, so I'm not gonna get really any stopping power in the front, and front stopping power is pretty important on a Supermoto. Thankfully though, in some weird way, I actually kind of planned for this. This is a sneak preview because I was gonna do this whole other video and probably still will for the RTR, but I made another custom brake rotor. This one is much bigger, so that way I can have a big rotor kit in the front for the RTR. And lucky enough, it's not like I planned this or anything, but this is pretty much the exact same size as the stock Alpha Pro rotor. So I can easily put this on the front Supermoto rim and everything should line up on the Alpha Pro just fine. Well, it almost went on perfectly. Well, as the saying goes, or at least the saying should be, it can't be a Supermoto without trimming involved. While the front actually does line up a lot easier on the Alpha Pro than it did the RTR, this one on the brake side actually lines up pretty nicely. There's still rubbing right here on this, so the fork guard needs to be trimmed down a little bit, and it turns out the spacing is actually a little longer because while this spacer for this side works just fine, it's this side that has quite a bit of play right here, so I need to find another spacer or possibly cut one so that I can make up that difference on this side. Hey, look at that, we got it to work. All it took was another spacer, which thankfully I had a lot of extra ones laying around from the Supermoto conversion that I did on the RTR, and one of them happened to fit perfectly, so I didn't have to do any cuts there. The only cut I did have to do was to the fork guard. I just had to trim off the plastic a little bit so that way the tire would clear, the exact same that I did on the RTR. However, while everything clears and the brake is working okay, it's not exactly the best. As you can see right there that the brake rotor, even though this is my big one that I'm going to be putting on the RTR as a big brake rotor kit, is still too small for the Alpha Pro. You can see that the brake rotor only fits in there and is only really touching like half of the pad, so I'm not gonna be able to do a full test on this thing. I need an even larger brake rotor or a dedicated kit for this thing in order to keep the Alpha Pro as a Supermoto.
Well, I'll at least get to test it out just a little bit. I want to see how it feels on the road, and it feels good. Got to remember to prioritize the rear brake here temporarily. This also gives me a chance to feel out the other mods that I did on this bike previously in the last video, that being the handlebars and the grips mostly, among a few other small fixes, and the bars feel really good. My Chubb has given this thing a proper width. And while the Supermoto is all well and good, that's not what we're really testing with this thing. We want to see what the impact is on the RTR here with the big wheel kit. And already, I can say it's so much better. And I guess everything else that we've done to this bike for that matter. So far, I'd say the big wheel kit is such a must-have on the dirt. Like, while the big wheel was super sketchy when we had a 50/50 setup on the Alpha Pro, that tall and skinny tire really helps in the dirt. I mean, that's why dirt bikes have such big, skinny front wheels, so that you can turn a lot easier. You can have more control in a loose surface like this. So another difference in this case anyway is gearing. Because we didn't change the gear ratio at all, and I later found out that with the big wheel kit comes a bigger gear, it's effectively doing the opposite. It's gearing it down a little bit because we've added a diameter to the wheel but not the gear. So as a result, takeoffs feel a little bit slower, but then again, this thing is already so torquey that I don't really feel a difference. And honestly, if you're going to be using the big wheel kit, you're going to be using it off-road, and maybe you want it geared a little longer for off-road. Also top speed, because again, we changed the wheel diameter. I don't exactly know what I'm doing. I know I'm doing more than what's shown. It doesn't feel like I've lost that much in terms of speed either. I know the differences are there, it's just that I don't feel them. What I do feel, honestly, is that it's more stable. It's more comfortable too. It's a little taller now, so it feels better for someone who's 6 foot like myself. And it's comfortable enough and confidence inspiring enough that I can handle any kind of trail, rocks, turns, whatever. Chain's holding on as well. That's a good sign. Both my masters are still intact. Again, don't do this. Have one full chain with one master link. Oh, here's another plus. Big wheels mean less bumps, or at least less impact on bumps. Still bumpy when it's that rocky though.
Having now ridden 2 small bikes with big wheels, I think it's safe to say that if you're off-roading, a big wheel kit is such a must-have. For me anyway, it is more comfortable, more stable, and because of those 2 things, more fun. But eagle-eyed viewers might notice that these 2 have had their wheels swapped back to their original bikes, and there are some reasons for that. First of all, the front Supermoto rim didn't even fit in the Alpha Pro's front brake caliper. I would have had to make an even larger rotor for this thing to even work properly. But more importantly is that the Alpha Pro here is just better suited for big wheels. Even though these 2 bikes here are the exact same size and even the same wheelbase, the swing arm on the Alpha Pro is longer on the inside and actually fits a 14-inch wheel. I mean, these come stock with the bike, so that makes sense. The RTR, on the other hand, barely holds this wheel in its swing arm. You have to have the axles as far back as it's possible to have, and Electro & Co themselves even advise cutting the mudguard here so it doesn't rub on the wheel. If Electro & Co was ever open and willing, I would personally suggest that they extend their swing arms in future bikes, because extending it even as little as an inch makes a big difference when you're swapping out wheels, especially a big wheel kit. And I bet there's a lot of people out there that can confirm that 1 extra inch makes all the difference.
It's a cinch, I'm in a pinch, just give me an inch, it'd be a cinch. I know a lot of people say that